Hi, everyone, and welcome to God's Plan, Your Part, a podcast where our goal is to read the entire Bible in a year, seeking to understand God's plan of redemption while discovering daily and practically your part in it.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to God's Plan, Your Part. Today we're looking at Deuteronomy 21 to 23. This is probably a section that's more difficult than some of the other sections we've been in because there is some pretty strange stuff in that. We can jump into that stuff here in just a second. Basically 21 is about, it's a lot of various rules and laws, actually. Like if you try to cut out what each chapter is, there's not a clear cut thing in each chapter. It's a lot of rules and laws about a lot of goofy stuff.
I think it's a lot of rules and laws about specific goofy stuff.
Goofy stuff. Yeah. And so as we read over these chapters, Jenny, what do you want to jump into?
Well, it's interesting. I feel like oftentimes in our own lives, I usually fall into this trap, and this is the usual advice you give me. I will say, well, what if this happens? And you typically tell me, we don't live in hypotheticals, so stop it. So I read these, and I'm like, this is so weird, because it feels like they're living in what seems to be very hypothetical situations. Well, if this happens, then this is the law. Because it's so incredibly specific.
There are very clear if and if-thens.
Yes.
So if this, then that. If this, then that.
So it's kind of funny, but I guess they just had to cover all the bases because weird things happen, and to know what to do with them and how to judge correctly according to God's law and what he expects. This stuff has to be put in place.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize too that God's initial law, the most, it's probably goofy to say the most important part, but God already gave the 10 Commandments. Mm-hmm. So many of these things that we're going to get into the weeds on are already violating the 10 Commandments. For example, there's several if-thens about adultery and having sex with people you're not supposed to. God already said, do not do that. And so it's important to remember, God already said no. So now he's helping them sort out what to do when somebody disobeys that first no, if that makes sense. So just because there's a passage about, I don't want to lie or come across ingenuous. There is weird things here for sure.
There are weird things.
There are weird things here. For example, if your son disobeys you too much, you take him to the elders and you stone him to death. That's in here.
And let's be real, because it's not just my kid's not listening to me.
Right.
This is extensive, not listening to parents, basically lazing around, getting drunk all the time, being extremely gluttonous, and just not giving a care about anything or anyone, super disrespectful, over the top. This is not just some little thing.
So it's important to remember that God has already said, children, obey your parents.
Yes.
This is good. What is the penalty for extreme disobedience of your parents? Being stoned to death, that's uncomfortable. I'm not going to pretend like it's not. Mm-hmm. There is a lot of studying to be done on why that is written down. A lot of times the harsh punishment is for the purpose of persuading you not to do the crime. Mm-hmm. So we actually still do that today. What's the death penalty for? Crimes that we really don't want people to do. So we don't read the death penalty today and say, well, they were fine with just murdering people. Right. That's not how it works. Mm-hmm. So these are extreme situations across the board, and they don't necessarily indicate God's desire for these situations, if that makes sense.
I had a question. It's kind of weird. So chapter 21 starts out with talking about atonement for unsolved murders, right?
Yeah.
So what they say is the elders of the city that is closest to the person who was killed.
Yeah.
They take a heifer that's never been worked, mm-hmm. or pulled a yoke, or in a yoke, excuse me, and they bring the heifer down to the valley.
Yep. And they sacrifice it.
So it says, then the priests, the sons of Levi, need to come forward. And it was talking about how basically they have to wash their hands of it. Is it because they're dealing with a dead person?
Remember that the themes of clean and unclean are very, very important. And also the theme of making sure the land remains clean is very important. And so when a person is murdered, that makes everybody involved unclean, and there must be atonement. And so when you find somebody who has been murdered, but you can't figure out who the murderer is, that, again, an extreme scenario, atonement has to be made. So they make a sacrifice on behalf of this sin that is obvious, for all the people to make the land clean. And so it's atonement for the people, even when it's unclear who is guilty. That you shouldn't hear that and think, well, they don't even care who's guilty. They didn't even look for the guy. They look for the guy. This is an extreme scenario where they can't figure it out. And so there is atonement.
Okay, so that was interesting for me. Next thing, there are like 3 small sections of laws for these different specific scenarios. And some of them caught my attention because I was telling Ryan earlier, it seems like some of them are things that we have already heard about or situations we've already heard about in the past. And maybe they're like, okay, we need a law for that because we don't want that to happen again. And then others remind me of things that are to come in the New Testament. So the first one is marrying. Oh, no. Is that the one? Yeah. No, it's not. Sorry, my bad. It's the inheritance of rights for the firstborn. And it's basically talking about if a man has 2 wives. So we've heard of this story before where...
Which you're not supposed to do.
Correct. So there's already the problem. Jacob has 2 wives, Leah and Rachel. And it says one is loved, one is unloved. But it says that he cannot show favoritism to the children that he loves from that loved spouse, which it immediately made me think right back to Leah, who was able to bear children to Jacob before Rachel was. So it's really interesting because he loved Rachel more, but would have had to give his blessing. What did it say? Like 2 times? What does that say?
Basically, you're going
Double
to
portion
make
of all
sure
he has,
that there
that
is
he's
not
taken care
favoritism
of.
and that
Yeah.
people are taken care of.
Yeah, so that was kind of cool.
So again, keep in your mind, God already said, 1 wife, that's it. So you're already going against the heart of God here. Now we have to sort out what we have to do when you go against the heart of God.
Yeah.
So that's important.
So then the next 2 pieces that caught my eye were right after it. So there's a little section about a rebellious son, which we kind of tapped on.
Yeah, we did.
But and maybe I'm off, but I immediately went to thinking about Jesus when he told the parable of basically the prodigal son, where he takes it a totally different direction, where he's like, okay, like there's a man who had a son who went off, who like squandered his wealth. He completely disrespected his father, his family, all the things. But the father was so happy when the son returned. So it's interesting that you have this like weird spin in like the Old Testament where it's like stone him, get rid of him, bye.
So I think Jesus is not writing a new law. He's telling a parable about what God the Father is like.
Yeah.
So they're not totally the same, but Jesus is able to leverage the law that people already understand and know to be like, hey, this is how extreme it is. And he does play on that. Like the son, the bad guy, is the good son who's like, what the heck? This guy just like ran away and like wasted all your wealth. Like, what? We should not be throwing a party for this guy.
We should be stoning him.
And so Jesus was doing that to show how much God loves people who repent of their sins and turn from their wicked ways and come back.
And then finally, at the end of chapter 21, we have this passage about a man who was hung on a tree. And it says, his body shall not remain on the tree all night, but you shall bury him the same day, for a hanged man is cursed by God. So I thought it was really interesting, like, whoa, when Jesus was killed and hung on the cross, was this the same kind of law or, I guess, rule for him as well to be taken down?
This is why they wanted to take him down immediately. Paul's going to say in Galatians 3:13, Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law by becoming a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who's hung on a tree, so that in Christ Jesus the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles, so that we might receive the promised Spirit through faith. So basically he's saying Jesus became a curse so that we would not receive a curse.
Right.
And he's using this tiny little thing in Deuteronomy.
But isn't that so crazy? Yeah, like all the way back to Deuteronomy.
Yeah.
Like that's so
It's because all these books painted their world. We've talked about that before.
So anyway, those are things that popped out to me. I know there was a lot that was going on in chapter 22 that we had discussed, but you had really like kind of dug in and found more information on.
Well, 22 is complicated because I read it and I was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I have not done a ton of scholarship on this passage. I am sure that this is a passage that people will highlight and say, God is so messed up. And I don't want to paint it like it's fine. Don't worry about it. I want to okay, this is weird. This is striking me as odd. I need to figure something out about this.
Yeah.
And so it does. It's very odd. So the first thing to remember, chapter 22 is a lot of laws about sex, basically. God already said, don't commit adultery. So all of these things that come in 22 are like, you're already going against the heart of God. Done. So now we're prescribing what needs to happen in these situations.
And isn't it interesting that of all the things, this is the part of the chapter that gets a lot of attention. Like sexual impurity
it
is
makes
like
sense
a
because
huge piece.
It is, and they needed to deal with it because I mean, still people like having sex, so that it's a thing.
But I think there's so many levels to
Yes.
it too. Like so much.
So there are things in here that's going to make a modern reader uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There's a lot of provisions about what to do in different kinds of rape situations. You should take note that there is a lot of punishment put on men. And so for example, if a man accuses a woman falsely of having committed adultery, he's going to get whipped a bunch of times and charged 100 shekel fine. So this again is where an extreme punishment is meant to discourage people from even committing the crime in the first place.
Probably within the knowledge of all the people too, humiliation.
So right away in my mind, where maybe a modern equivalent is we have very stiff penalties for people who commit war crimes, or very stiff penalties for serial killers. Okay? What that does for us is it prevents us from having tons of serial killers.
Right.
But if you only read the law, so that's what we're doing, we're just reading the law, and you read the penalty for serial killers, you're going to be like, oh my word. God lays down what to do if you kill 15 people? Why is God okay with this? It's no, this is the law. God's not okay with this already.
Right. Yeah.
And so there's a very stiff penalty for men who falsely accuse women of committing adultery because God wants to protect women and not allow men to take advantage of them. Probably, I don't really want to dive into every single one of these. It's not because I'm afraid of them. It's actually because I don't want to go into a 60-minute episode. The thing that made you most uncomfortable, Jenny, was what, verse 28?
Yeah. Can I just talk about the things that
Yeah.
are really
Yeah.
great,
Yeah.
though? Because I feel like I was reading some of these, and I was like, oh my gosh. I think what really threw me off mostly was that I always, in each instance, assumed that the female or the woman was innocent in it was always she was the damsel in distress that was being taken advantage of, but that's not always the case. So that's something to keep in mind. But in verse 25, where did it go? Yeah, verse 25, it says, "But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no offense punishable by death. For this case is like that of a man attacking and murdering his neighbor because he met in the open country. The woman cried for help and there was no one to rescue her." So that to me is that's crazy, because she's completely taken advantage of, and the man is severely, punished to death. So to me, it's just okay, they're actually on the side of the woman. But then you get into some other ones where it feels goofy because the woman is also punished. But at the same time, remember that thing that I was talking about earlier, is that the woman is not always that innocent figure. So I think you kind of can lead in with some other things that you were talking about.
So you pointed out, verse 28, if a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days.
That one didn't sit well at first.
Why?
I think
Well, it's obvious because I just read it. But
he's not allowed to divorce her all his days. But what got me was the word seizes her. And to me, that sounds like he takes her without consent, does what he wants, and she's just kind of left there.
So I think we have a couple options.
Yeah.
The first one is we can read this and be like, this is messed up. I'm not into this. God is horrible. I don't like it. This is unacceptable. plenty of people take that position. Honestly, if you take that position, I definitely understand where you're coming from, because you read it for face value, it seems pretty bad. The next thing you can look at is, say, the thing that was important to women at that time was not relationships, it was security. So it's like, by requiring the man to stay married to the woman, you are ensuring security for the woman against the will of the man. Obviously, we read that today and we're like, she's stuck with somebody who doesn't love her and like raped her? That's crazy. That's so wrong. It is possible you look at this and you say, hey, that's actually not what they were concerned about. They weren't concerned about the modern idea of love. They were concerned about security for family and like
lineage.
Inheritance.
I mean, if you think about it, like the whole idea of like Abraham's line and like it being able to like continue throughout time, that was probably the idea for these Israelite people too. Like they wanted their line to continue, and not having that and just being like defiled by somebody. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Am I tracking correctly?
Well, basically what I'm going to do is just set up like the possibilities here. The third one is the one I probably resonate with more personally after having done some research on this. So the interesting thing to notice here is that God has already laid out, the law has already laid out what to do in rape situations. So you have what to do in a situation where the woman is raped in a city where she could cry for help, how you handle that. What to do with a rape situation where it's like out in the open country and the woman cannot get any help, what to do with that. So it's interesting that we're getting a provision for rape when rape has already been dealt with. So what some people do is they look at this and they say, well, it's interesting. The Hebrew word used here is tapas. I'm not a Hebrew scholar, so I might have said that wrong.
Sounds like Spanish hors d'oeuvre.
I think it is, right? It is possible to translate that in a way that implies that this is a consensual thing and it is not necessarily sexual. So I understand you can hear us read it, you can read it in the English and be like, that is not what it says. But it wasn't written in English, and so it's been interpreted several times. And so what some of the guys I was reading was saying is this is actually the instance of like unmarried people messing around. And what is happening here is, hey, like you can't mess around, and if you do, you're getting married. That's what's going to happen. That's kind of interesting to me because there's nothing about crying out. Like there's no provision for what to do. Like if you're against your will, or well, I mean you read it for face value, it is against your will, I guess.
Where do you see that it's against her will?
Seizes her. I mean, feels.
That's the word that I was talking
seizes
about
her,
earlier.
feels against her will, but that's that tapas word.
Right.
So it could be that it's kind of like this premarital.
It also
encounter.
says, and they are found.
Exactly. That's what they call out. Yes, that it's not like there's not responsibility put on one or the other. And so then the idea is you will stay married because like you've been doing things that are intended for marriage and now you're married. That's what's going to happen.
None of this like casual sex situation.
Well, some of the guys were saying it's not even rising to a sexual situation. It's like pre-sex kind of stuff.
Oh, great. Okay.
So, I mean, I would encourage you, look to your own scholarship and try to figure it out. You read it, you'd be like, this is nasty.
Well, something else, seriously, there's a lot of words or like words in here about open country versus being in a city. And what's interesting is these are the Israelite people. So this law applies to all of them. So when in a city, if a woman cries out for help, you better believe that there are going to be people charging in and helping her because they know the law and they know what the consequence is for a man who takes a woman that shouldn't be. So like it's like this weird like community aspect too, where they are trying to fulfill this law and keep God's law. So they're definitely going to come to her rescue and judge how they need to.
I did read, just to add to this perspective, I did read another scholar that was saying it's interesting that in verse 29, it says the man's going to pay the fine, the dowry, basically.
Yeah.
And she shall be his wife because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days. One guy was saying that the emphasis is on the man, and the woman would have actually had the opportunity to decide not to be married. I am not giving this to you as like, this is how to see it. I'm saying like, hey, there's several different ways to see this. I am not sure which one is correct because I am not an expert on this passage. So it's a wild passage. I think it drives us closer to scholarship. Let's try to understand what's going on here. and really with the whole Bible, don't jump to conclusions, but particularly in passages that are very difficult. And then finally, just to wrap this sucker up, because I think we're going long, there is some direction on not pooping in town.
I literally read that and I thought of that book, Everybody Poops, and apparently the Israelites did too, and the Bible talks about how they should cover it up.
So that would fall in the category, if you've been listening for a while, we talked about how some of the law is actually meant to just be good health decisions.
Yeah.
And like a lot of plagues in the Middle Ages came out of the fact that like human waste was just in
everywhere.
the camp. And so God is saying, hey, I want you guys to be healthy. I want you to make healthy choices. So like you're going to put sewage outside the camp so that you don't get sick. The your part, we're going to do this real quick. I think the your part is there are hard passages in the Bible. When there are hard passages in the Bible, we should look into them and figure out what they mean. I was literally listening to a guy earlier today that said, don't use hard passages to interpret the Bible. Use easy ones first. Mm-hmm. And then use what you know from the easy passages to help you understand the hard passages. And I think it's actually pretty excellent. And it helps make the case that we should be familiar with the entire Bible, because that's going to help us understand hard passages. So we'll be back again tomorrow. See you then. Hey, thanks so much for listening to our take on God's Word. Stick around and listen to the Word on the second part of the podcast. Before we get in there, we just want to remind you, you can connect with us at any time on social media and YouTube at God's Plan, Your Part. Also, we are a listener-supported podcast, so if you ever want to help us out with the ministry that we're doing, you can do that by clicking the link in our description. And now, here's the reading for today.
Deuteronomy chapter 21. If in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess, someone is found slain, lying in the open country, and is not known who killed him, then your elders and your judges shall come out, and they shall measure the distance to the surrounding cities. And the elders of that city that is nearest to the slain man shall take a heifer that has been worked and that has not pulled a yoke, and the elders of that city shall bring the heifer down to the valley with running water, which is neither plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. Then the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come forward, for the Lord your God has chosen them to minister to him and to bless in the name of the Lord, and by their word every dispute and every assault shall be settled. And all the elders of that city nearest the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the valley, and they shall testify, our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it shed. Accept atonement, O Lord, for your people Israel, whom you have redeemed, and do not set the guilt of the innocent blood in the midst of your people Israel, so that their blood guilt be atoned for. So you shall purge the guilt of innocent blood from your midst, when you do what is right in the sight of the Lord. When you go out to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God gives them into your hand, and you take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire to take her to be your wife, and you bring her home to your house, she shall shave her head and pare her nails. And she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured, and shall remain in your house, and lament her father and her mother a full month. After that you may go in to her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. But if you no longer delight in her, you shall let her go where she wants. But you shall not sell her for money, nor shall you treat her as a slave, since you have humiliated her. If a man has two wives, the one loved and the other unloved, and both the loved and the unloved are born him children, and if the firstborn son belongs to the unloved, then on the day when he assigns his possessions as an inheritance to his sons, he may not treat the son of the loved as the firstborn in preference to the son of the unloved, who is the firstborn, but he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the firstfruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and though they discipline him, will not listen to them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of the city at the gate of the place where he lives, and they shall say to the elders of the city, This is our son, stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel shall hear and fear. And if a man is committed a crime punishable by death, and he is put to death, and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night on the tree, but you shall bury him in the same day, for a hanged man is a cursed man by God. You shall not defile your land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance.
You shall not see your brother's ox or his sheep going astray and ignore them. You shall take them back to your brother. And if he does not live near you, and you do not know where he is, you shall bring it home to your house, and it shall stay with you until your brother seeks it. Then you shall restore it to him. And you shall do the same with his donkey, or with his garment, or with any lost thing of your brother's, which he loses and you find. You may not ignore it. You shall not see your brother's donkey or his ox fallen down by the way and ignore them. You shall help him to lift them up again. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. For whoever does these things is an abomination to the Lord your God. If you come across a bird's nest in a tree or on the ground, with young ones or eggs, and the mother sitting on the young ones or the eggs, you shall not take the mother with the young. You shall not let the mother go, but the young you may take for yourself, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long. When you build a new house, you shall make a parapet for your roof, that you may not bring the guilt of blood upon your house if anyone should fall from it. You shall not sow your vineyard with two kinds of seed, lest the whole yield be forfeited. The crop that you have sown and the yield of the vineyard. You shall not plow with an ox and a donkey together. You shall not wear cloth of wool and linen mixed together. You shall make yourself tassels on the four corners of your garments, with which you cover yourself. If any man takes a wife and goes into her and then hates her, and accuses her of misconduct, and brings a bad name upon her, saying, I took this woman, and when I came near her I did not find in her evidence of virginity, then the father of the young woman and her mother shall take and bring out the evidence of her virginity to the elders in the city gate. And the father of the young woman shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man to marry, and he hates her. And behold, he has accused her of misconduct, saying, I did not find in your daughter evidence of virginity. And yet this is the evidence of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the cloak before the elders of the city. Then the elders in that city shall take the man and whip him. And they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver, and give them to the father of the young woman, because he has brought a bad name upon a virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife. He may not divorce her all his days. But if the thing is true, that evidence of virginity was not found in the young woman, then they shall bring out the young woman to the door of the father's house, and the men of the city shall stone her to death with stones, because she has done an outrageous thing in Israel by whoring in her father's house. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. If a man is found lying with the wife of another man, both of them shall die, the man who lay with the woman and the woman. So you shall purge the evil from Israel. If there is a betrothed virgin, and a man meets her in the city and lies with her, then you shall bring them both out to the gate of that city, and you shall stone them to death with stones. The young woman because she did not cry for help, though she was in the city, and the man because he violated his neighbor's wife. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. But if in the open country a man meets a young woman who is betrothed, and the man seizes her and lies with her, then only the man who lay with her shall die. But you shall do nothing to the young woman. She has committed no offense punishable by death. For this case is like that of a man attacking and murdering his neighbor, because he met her in the open country, and though the betrothed young woman cried for help, there was no one to rescue her. If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has violated her. He may not divorce her all his days. A man shall not take his father's wife, so that he does not uncover his father's nakedness. No one whose testicles are crushed or whose male organ is cut off shall enter the assembly of the Lord. No one born of a forbidden union may enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of his descendants may enter the assembly of the Lord. No Ammonite or Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. None of them may enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and with water on the way when you came out of Egypt, and because they hired against you Balaam the son of Beor from Peor in Mesopotamia, to curse you. But the Lord your God would not listen to Balaam. Instead, the Lord your God turned the curse into a blessing for you, because the Lord your God loved you. You shall not seek their peace or their prosperity all your days forever. You shall not abhor an Edomite, for he is your brother. You shall not abhor an Egyptian, because you were a sojourner in his land. Children born to them in the third generation may enter the assembly of the Lord. When you are encamped against your enemies, you shall keep yourself from every evil thing. If any man among you becomes unclean because of a nocturnal emission, then he shall go outside the camp. He shall not come inside the camp. But when evening comes, you shall bathe him in water, and as the sun sets, he may come inside the camp. You shall have a place outside the camp, and you shall go out to it. And you shall have a trowel with your tools, and when you sit down outside, you shall dig a hole with it, and turn back and cover up your excrement. Because the Lord your God walks in the midst of your camp to deliver you and give up your enemies before you. Therefore your camp must be holy, that he may not see anything indecent among you, and turn away from you. You shall not give up to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. He shall dwell with you in your midst, in the place that you shall choose within one of your towns, wherever it suits him. You shall not wrong him. None of the daughters of Israel shall be a cult prostitute, and none of the sons of Israel shall be a cult prostitute. You shall not bring the fee of a prostitute or the wages of a dog into the house of the Lord your God in payment for any vow, for both of these are an abomination to the Lord your God. You shall not charge interest on loans to your brother. Interest on money, interest on food, interest on anything that is lent for interest. You may charge a foreigner interest, but you may not charge your brother interest, that the Lord your God may bless you in all that you undertake in the land, that you are entering to take a possession of it. If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay in fulfilling it, for the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from vowing, you will not be guilty of sin. You shall be careful to do what has pleased your lips, for you have voluntarily vowed to the Lord your God what you have promised with your mouth. If you go into your neighbor's vineyard, you may eat your fill of grapes as you wish, but you shall not put any in your bag. If you go into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the ears with your hand, but you shall not put a sickle to your neighbor's standing grain.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplanyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.